The city of Opolis was often called the Jewel of the Nebula. It was a sprawling masterpiece of crystalline towers, floating gardens, and arches that defied gravity. But its true beauty, and its ultimate arrogance, lay in its defense, the hard light shell. The Luminos, the masters of Opolis, had achieved what most species thought was impossible. They had learned to solidify photons. They didn't build walls out of stone or steel. They built them out of light. The shell was a shimmering, translucent dome that surrounded the entire capital. It was thinner than a sheet of paper, but it was harder than diamond and more reflective than a mirror. For centuries, the Luminos had watched from their balconies as would-be conquerors tried to breach the city. They watched with bored amusement as plasma cannons splashed harmlessly against the light. They laughed when heavy laser batteries fired for days, only for the beams to be reflected straight back at the ships that fired them. To the Luminos, matter was a primitive, heavy burden. Light was the future. Light was invincible. When the human fleet arrived in orbit, the Luminos didn't even bother to stop their music. They looked up at the blocky, scarred human destroyers and saw more of the same. Another race of torchbearers, the High Architect of Opolis remarked, sipping his nectar. They will burn their fingers against our brilliance and then they will go home. Down on the surface, Private Jack sat in the mud outside the city's perimeter. He was part of the first recon, a scout team sent to observe the effectiveness of orbital support. He looked at the massive glowing dome of Opolis. It was beautiful. It was also infuriating. He had seen his squad fire every energy weapon they had at that wall. All it did was make the city look prettier. "Command, this is Jax," he whispered into his comms. "Energy fire is still 100% ineffective. The wall isn't even warm. Requesting a new strategy. Over." "Copy that, Jax," a cold, calm voice replied from the bridge of the flagship Newton's Gavel. "We're done with the light show. The general says it's time to collect the tithe. Stand back. Way back." Jax didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled into a deep, reinforced trench, pulled his helmet down tight and waited. High above the clouds, General Elias Stone Vance stood on the bridge of the human flagship. He wasn't looking at the laser readouts or the power levels of the beam cannons. He was looking at a manual release lever, a heavy piece of mechanical iron. "The Luminos think they've beaten the laws of war because they've mastered light," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "They've forgotten that light is just a guest in a universe made of mass. They want to be gods? Let's see how they handle a bit of gravity." Vance pulled the lever. Deep in the belly of the ship, the magnetic clamps released. There were no cooling fans, no charging capacitors, no high-pitched whines of energy. Just a heavy, metallic clunk that vibrated through the hull. 20 massive cylinders of solid tungsten, each the size of a telephone pole and weighing 10 tons, fell out of the cargo bay. They didn't have guidance systems. They didn't have engines. They didn't have warheads. They were just dumb metal. For the first few seconds they fell silently through the void. Then they hit the atmosphere of Opolis. The Luminos High Architect looked up. The sky was usually filled with the pretty red and green streaks of human lasers. But this was different. He saw 20 black specks, quickly becoming 20 white-hot stars. They weren't streaking horizontally like ships. They were falling straight down. "What is that?" the architect asked, his voice trembling for the first time. "Are they missiles? Why is there no energy signature?" "Our sensors don't know, Architect," his technician shouted. "They aren't radiating heat from a core. They're just moving. They're moving at Mach 15 and they aren't slowing down." The air began to scream. The sound of 20 10-ton rods tearing through the atmosphere was like the sky itself was being ripped in half. The sonic booms shattered windows across Opolis before the objects even arrived. The friction turned the air around the rods into a roaring tunnel of orange plasma. The Luminos scrambled to reinforce the hard light shell. "Maximum power to the upper quadrants," the architect roared. "Reflect them. Send them back into the stars." The light wall flared with blinding intensity. It became a solid, white-hot mirror. It was prepared to reflect any amount of heat, any amount of radiation, any amount of light. But you cannot reflect a mountain. The first tungsten rod hit the dome. The hard light shell was structurally perfect. It didn't break. It was harder than the tungsten itself. But physics has a law that even light must obey: conservation of momentum. The rod hit the shell with the force of a tectonic plate shift. The light wall held, but the kinetic energy, the sheer brutal thump of 10 tons moving at 10,000 miles per hour, didn't stop. It traveled through the light. It traveled through the projectors. It traveled straight down into the foundations of the city. The hard light dome didn't shatter, but the ground beneath it did. Private Jax felt the earth jump 3 feet into the air. The sound wasn't an explosion, it was a bone-shattering thud that felt like the planet had been hit by a giant's hammer. Inside Opolis it was a massacre. The foundations of the crystalline towers were turned to powder in an instant. The floating gardens fell from the sky. The arches collapsed. The Luminos, who had lived their lives in a world of weightless light, were crushed by the weight of their own falling buildings. The second rod hit. Then the third. Then the 10th. The hard light shell stayed up, a perfect, glowing bubble. But inside that bubble, Opolis was being turned into a blender. The kinetic shock waves bounced off the inside of the dome, vibrating everything within the city until it disintegrated. The Luminos were literally shaken apart inside their invincible fortress. When the dust finally settled, Opolis was gone. The glowing dome remained, shimmering beautifully in the twilight, but it was now just a giant glass jar filled with ash and rubble. General Vance looked down from the bridge of the Newton's gavel. He didn't cheer. He didn't celebrate. He just checked a box on his clipboard. "The Tungsten Tithe has been collected," he said quietly. Down in his trench, Private Jax climbed out and looked at the city. The hard light wall was still there, flickering slightly. He walked up to it and did something he'd wanted to do for a week. He picked up a small, regular rock from the dirt and tossed it at the glowing barrier. The rock hit the wall and bounced off. Jax nodded. "Yeah, you're great at stopping things. But you're terrible at stopping the force. This is the Tungsten Tithe. Humanity is the only species that understands that the universe isn't just a collection of frequencies and lights. It is a place of weight. It is a place of mass. It is a place where, if you drop something heavy enough from a high enough place, God himself has to move out of the way." The Luminos had built a shield for the future, but they had forgotten the lessons of the past. They had brought mirrors to a rock fight. And in the end, the only thing that mattered was the gospel of momentum. The Galactic Council later reviewed the footage of the fall of Opolis. They saw the beautiful, unbroken light dome and the pulverized city beneath it. They asked the human ambassadors how they had bypassed the perfect defense. The ambassador simply leaned forward and placed a small, heavy iron paperweight on the table. "We didn't bypass it," the ambassador said. "We just sent the bill. And gravity always collects." Humanity had proven the ultimate physical HFY truth. You can master the light. You can master the stars. But as long as you live in a universe with mass, you are subject to the hammer. We are the ones who drop the weight. We are the ones who collect the tithe. And when the sky starts to scream, you'll realize that your light is no match for our lead. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Keep your feet on the ground and your eyes on the sky. If you enjoyed this kinetic conquest of the Light City, hit that like button. Comment below. What's the most unstoppable defense you've ever seen in sci-fi, and how would a human break it? Subscribe for the next conquest of Saga X, the relativistic nail. The sky is falling. The tithe is paid.